Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you.
Hey.
We are so excited to play with you this week. You played with the VSO 2 years ago, and it was such a spectacular experience for everybody. Last time, you and Ashley had a very extensive interview. So today, I kind of wanted to pick up from where we left off. So could you please tell us what have you been up to, your projects, recordings, everything that is going on?
Yeah, so my last two albums, one was released last year, very, very close to my heart, with a concerto that was actually composed for me by my dear friend Earl Manian. And it's the world's first serious classical violin concerto inspired by the subgenres of extreme metal. And so it's not a rock and roll concerto or crossover music or anything like that. It's, full-fledged classical, but just like Bartók used Hungarian folk music, rhythms and melodies and harmonies to inspire his music. This is all original music, but it's if you know death metal and hardcore and certain things like that, you'll hear those roots. Otherwise, you'll probably just hear it as a really intense, exciting piece of classical music. So that was paired with the Shostakovich Violin Concerto recorded with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. And then my latest album was just released a few weeks ago, the complete Opus 5 sonatas of Arcangelo Corelli from the year 1700. And that was, of course, on my Baroque violin with colleagues playing lute and viola da gamba and harpsichord and things like that. And really a long time dream because I've been performing this music since I was 14. And Corelli is my direct musical ancestor, teacher to teacher to teacher in a straight line. So, yeah, I'm really happy that those two are out. I think I've got more than 40 at this point and lots more in the pipeline, lots of plans. But honestly, I mean, I love being able to share music via recording so that everybody everywhere on the planet can hear it and it's, preserved for posterity and all of that. But there's nothing more thrilling than live performance. So, um, really happy to be returning to your orchestra and to be doing the Mendelssohn this time.
Oh, that is fantastic. Yeah, so you did the last time you played with Korngold and Odin just loved it, but I'm so happy you chose Mendelssohn this time. Tell us a little bit what inspires you about the concerto and maybe the history.
Yeah, well, there's a famous quote by Joseph Joachim, who was Brahms's best friend and collaborator, and he talks about the great German violin concertos, Brahms, Beethoven, Bruch, and he says Mendelssohn is the heart's jewel, and it's something that no matter how many hundreds or thousands of times you hear it or play it, there's just something so fresh and enchanting about it. You can never get tired of this music, and it's interesting because it is I don't want to say easier, but it's less strenuous and in a kind of a way less strength and stamina demanded than some of the other big concertos like Tchaikovsky, Sibelius, etc. And so it does end up, along with Bruch just simply because it's so short. Bruch and Mendelssohn end up being the two that young violinists typically will study as their first major romantic concertos. But that doesn't mean that it's easier than others because trying to just find the depths of its potential is, a lifetime pursuit. And,
Yeah.
you can always come up with new colors, new nuances, just always trying to search for more. But it's been fun to collaborate with my daughter as she's been learning it. And going back to my own childhood, of course, it was one of the first concertos that I soloed with orchestras
Mhm.
alongside the obvious, Mozart and Vivaldi and all those kinds of things when you're a kid. But playing Mendelssohn, there was one very memorable concert. When I was 11 years old, I was invited to play just the last movement of the Mendelssohn
Mhm.
on a family concert with a Wild West theme. So, of course, they did, some of these typical, all these kinds of things. I got to actually dress up in an outfit that had a checkered shirt, a blue jean skirt, cowboy boots, a big belt buckle. My hair was in braids. And of course, this somehow it fit. And to this day, when the famous trumpet call kicks in and the last movement is off to the races, I always think, yeehaw!
Oh, that's
So,
awesome.
so my experience of Mendelssohn has been permanently polluted, but such a great thing to be able to play a piece like that when you're young and then just live with it so that as I've evolved, my Mendelssohn has evolved along with me.
Wow, that is amazing. It's just such an incredible piece. In many ways, kind of the cross between classical and romantic, right? As I understand, before Mendelssohn, majority of the romantic concertos soloists improvised their cadenzas, and Mendelssohn actually wrote the cadenza. And are you playing the original cadenza?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a couple of artists along over the years who've, tried to sort of insert their own, but it's not like the old classical period model with Mozart and Beethoven, where the orchestra would come to a full stop, and then there would be this fantasia on themes from the movement and come to a trill, and then tutti comes back in. So it's very kind of cut and dry, and in those cases, the performer, well, in the 18th century they would have improvised it, and then the 19th century onwards, people wrote their own. And nowadays you have the choice to play a classic one by a performer of the past or to make your own. I always make my own because I think it's the most personal thing that I can do. But in the case of Mendelssohn, it's not just a question of the fact that he wrote this cadenza. It's really a different approach to the idea of the cadenza. So it is the violin unaccompanied, but it's integrated into the architecture of the movement. So the orchestra doesn't stop and then I take a breath and start something new. In fact, my cadenza emerges out of the orchestra. And then when the orchestra comes back in, I'm kind of playing these arpeggios and they sort of join me again. And so it kind of weaves in and out. And it obviously was part of his actual composition. So I would feel wrong inserting something different. I would no sooner do that than I would take a bit of the music with orchestra and substitute something of mine for something of his. I feel like it's his composition and I have to play it. And it's interesting because all the cadenzas from that point on, Tchaikovsky, Sibelius, they're all also the same way, where Tchaikovsky has a trill at the end of the cadenza, but still, the composers wrote them and they had certain ideas in mind for them. Brahms was really the last one where he left it for the soloist to do their own thing. And I always think one of the most interesting things about the Mendelssohn Concerto is the fact that he was one of the first people to have one movement flow into the next, and certainly composers after him went back to the old model of having a first movement end, and sometimes audiences, if they particularly like it, will even applaud after the first movement before you go on to the next. Tchaikovsky's a great example of that. But I think, again, this is going to his idea of pure music. The fact that the first movement doesn't end with a bang, but it carries on with just this note from a bassoon of all
Mhm.
instruments. And then just kind of the second movement emerges, or it morphs into the second movement, and then it sort of closes out, but then there's this introduction to the third movement. And so he's really not only integrated the cadenza within the concerto, but he's integrated all of the movements of the concerto to each other, and to make just one complete organic statement from beginning to end. There's not even an opening tutti. You don't get to stand there on
Mhm.
stage for 2 minutes waiting for your turn. The orchestra starts, and 5 seconds later, the soloist has joined in, and it's really and at the time, quite radical idea, actually. Now it seems, of course, 200 years on, perfectly normal, but
Sure.
really, this was something new and different. And if you listen with those ears, like, this is something that was fresh, that was experimental in a way. I think you can just enjoy this concerto so much, not only for its beautiful melodies that we all know and love, but also just realizing, okay, here's this idea of a concerto not just being about, look at the impressive soloist, but about the orchestra and violin joining together in this almost this chamber music kind of collaboration, which I think is so much more satisfying on a deeper level than just a bunch of fireworks.
Well, this is fantastic. Tell us a little bit about your violin. You talked about it in your last podcast, but tell us, please.
Yes, so this is still the main instrument I've played since 2002, and it's known as the ex Bazzini ex Soldat in honor of two of the great violinists in the past who played it. Antonio Bazzini was one
Mhm.
of the great Italian post Paganini virtuosos,
Mhm.
first part of the 19th century, and he's most famous now for his little virtuoso piece, "The Round of the Goblins."
Goblins, yeah.
But during his lifetime, of course, he wrote concertos, chamber music, all kinds of good stuff, and was one of the great performers. And then in the latter half into the 20th century, late 1800s, early 1900s, it was the concert instrument of Marie Soldat, who
Oh, wow.
was a woman violin soloist who had been discovered by Brahms when she was a teenager. And Brahms was a mentor to her for the remainder of his life, and they frequently played chamber music together. And even back then, instruments could be priced out of the possibility of some artists who deserved them. And so Brahms found an aristocratic family who agreed to buy an instrument for Marie Soldat's use. And Brahms himself chose this very violin. So it's just amazing to play an instrument whose voice Brahms knew and selected, and then also to realize that this violin got to jam with Brahms. So it's pretty incredible to get to play it every day and be inspired by its voice. And who knows, someday this instrument might also be known as the X Pine, but that will never happen until I'm the X Pine, so I'll never find out. But it was made by one of the great Italian makers, Guarneri del Gesù, in 1742, same maker and year as Paganini's instrument. Um, Guarneri and Stradivari are considered to be the two greatest makers, and it's just a matter of taste which one you prefer, like white wine or red wine. Some people go
Right.
in one or the other direction, and I've always loved the deep, rich sound of Guarneri's, so I'm very lucky to have the use of this instrument.
So there is a chance that maybe Brahms actually touched this instrument.
Well, I mean, I imagine he probably laid his
Wow.
hands on it on at some point, but he definitely rehearsed and performed with it all the time. You know, Brahms at the piano and Marie Soldat playing
Yeah.
sonatas and trios and quintets and all that stuff with Brahms and his cohort. And of course, she was also um, one of the first champions of the Brahms Violin Concerto. It was premiered, of course, with the Dedicate to Joachim and Brahms conducting. The second performance in Berlin, Joachim conducted and Marie Soldat played the violin part. And she gave it its premiere in Vienna and many other European cities. And on this side of the ocean, it was the great Maud Powell, another Joachim student, who was one of the first champions of the Brahms concerto and actually left a wonderful cadenza to it. I think Marie Soldat played Joachim's cadenza, but Maud Powell played her own, which is just a marvelous work.
Well, this is incredible. Again, I want to thank you for speaking with me today, and we all are so excited to see you in a few days, and of course, making beautiful music this Saturday and Sunday. Can't wait.
All right. Well, I'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you very much.
Take care.